and welcome to Diabetes Connections in the News. I'm Stacey Sims. These are the top diabetes stories and headlines happening now. In the News is brought to you by Edgepark. Simplify your diabetes journey with Edgepark. Our top story this week, Abbott scoops up Bigfoot Biomedical. The deal is expected to close later this year. No financial terms yet disclosed. Abbott and Bigfoot have worked together since 2017 on a connected insulin pen system. Bigfoot Unity exclusively works with Abbott's Freestyle Libre. Longtime listeners will recall that Bigfoot was founded in 2014 around serving people with type 1 with a closed-loop pump system that Brian Maslish had developed for his wife and son. Maslish was very secretive at first about the algorithm. This was before people were sure the FDA wouldn't crack down on them, so a journalist nicknamed him Bigfoot. Along the way, the company pivoted to CGM-connected smart pens. I think Bigfoot Biomedical was my third interview back in 2015. I'm going to link up all of the shows I've done with them in the show notes, along with all of the sources for the stories you will hear. Low-dose aspirin reduces the risk for type 2 among older adults and slows the increase in fasting glucose levels over time. This comes from a secondary analysis of a very large, 16,000 people, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial of healthy adults over the age of 65. It showed that people taking a 100 milligram dose of aspirin every day had a 15% lower risk for developing type 2. However, the lead author points out that right now, major prescribing guidelines recommend older adults take daily aspirin only when there is a medical reason to do so. She goes on to say these new findings are of interest, but they don't change the clinical advice. Class action lawsuit filed against Medtronic, alleging that the company's insulin delivery devices shared patient data with third parties. This lawsuit alleges that Medtronic, MiniMed, and InPen devices transmitted personally identifiable information and protected health information to Google and other third parties. Medtronic spokesperson says they have strong processes, technologies, and people in place to safeguard and protect information and systems. Interesting new way to look at type 2, not treating with weight loss or medication, but reducing how much blood glucose goes up and stays up after eating and drinking. This is called Glucose Everyday Matters, or GEM, developed by University of Virginia's Daniel Cox, and aims to prevent blood sugar spikes via educated food and drink selection coupled with physical activity. So you might have a small sweet treat or a piece of fruit, and then go for an evening stroll to even out blood glucose. And it sounds really simple. In its first admittedly small study, it helped almost 70% of people put their type 2 into remission without weight loss or using medication. The National Institutes of Health has now provided a big grant for a large-scale clinical trial. Cox himself went from an A1C of 10.3 at his diagnosis to now under 6 for the past 13 years using the GEM approach. Possible new treatment for type 1 diabetes very early here. New clinical study called Diagnode 3, designed to confirm the efficacy and safety of antigen-specific immunotherapy, Diamid, in patients who are 12 to 29 years old, recently diagnosed with type 1, and who carry the very specific genetic marker. There are already many clinical sites in European countries. They expect about 10 to 12 across the United States. About 40% of all screened patients seem to carry the genetic marker, which these researchers say aligns with their expectations. A low-carb diet during pregnancy may have some benefits in gestational diabetes, but overall not associated with any significant difference in outcomes. This was the conclusion at a presentation at ADA Scientific Sessions back in June. I just learned about it, so I'm passing it along to you in case you missed it as well. Both presenters agreed that the first line of therapy with gestational diabetes is nutrition, but that current advice is inconsistent and that professional guidelines have, quote, limitations and biases. The concern with lowering carbs is the risk of consuming lower nutrient-dense foods, which could result in producing ketones, which may be associated with negative effects on the developing baby. And these researchers point out that pregnancy is dynamic. Nobody is the same today as they were yesterday, and that means nutritional demands may be different as well. One of the presenters also pointed out that women and girls tend to be priced out of good nutritional patterns, not only during pregnancy, but also in the global community. Right back to the news, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Edgepark. Take control of your diabetes with a broad range of diabetes management supplies from Edgepark. The latest diabetes supplies and continuous glucose monitors from top brands simplify blood sugar management. Edgepark accepts most insurance plans, and Medicare and Medicare Advantage cover certain devices. Plus, Edgepark takes care of the insurance paperwork to make ordering as seamless as possible. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Edgepark logo to learn more about Edgepark's diabetes supplies and CGM devices. Back to the news, and can ChatGPT help answer questions about diabetes? Researchers tested ChatGPT to find out whether it could answer frequently asked diabetes questions. They put it on the FAQ section of the Diabetes Association of Denmark's website. Across the 10 questions, the proportion of correct responses ranged from 38% to 74%, and participants correctly identified the ChatGPT-generated replies 60% of the time. These researchers say as large language models increasingly intersect with healthcare, rigorous studies are essential to evaluate their safety, efficacy, and ethical considerations. Beyond Type 1 is back in the New York City Marathon. This year, the organization is expanding its 50-person team, Beyond Type Run, to include people living with Type 1 or Type 2, as well as caregivers to those living with diabetes. Since 2017, Beyond Type Run has featured more than 200 people on the team. Dexcom and Tandem Diabetes Care are presenting sponsors of Beyond Type Run for the 4th consecutive year. By the way, the New York City Marathon official charity partner program has raised more than $440 million for more than 1,000 nonprofit organizations since 2006. Quick note, want to tell you about Mom's Night Out. I've got a promo code for you. It is a back-to-school savings. You can save $30 off registration with the promo code SCHOOL30. Just go to diabetes-connections.com. There's a Mom's Night Out link there, and you can save. We are going to be in Dallas, Texas, in Frisco. That's October. We'll be in Providence, Rhode Island later in October, and then in Charlotte, North Carolina in February of 2024. Save $30 off registration with that promo code SCHOOL30. On the podcast next week, this is an interesting one. If you send your kid to school with glucagon and they don't have it for whatever reason, can you use another kid's? The answer is no, except in 4 states. We're going to talk about why, what those states did, what you can do to get that changed, and the real life story that spurred all this. There was a school nurse who had to choose between violating the law or using somebody else's glucagon to help a kid with an emergency low. Last week's episode was all about Breaking Limits, a new documentary in the works about extreme athletes with Type 1. And that's it for In the News for this week. If you like it, please share it. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.